The Miami Grand Prix may have ended with champagne and celebration, but the drama was far from over. In a stunning post-race twist, Red Bull and Max Verstappen filed a formal complaint to the FIA targeting Mercedes' George Russell. The accusation that Russell failed to slow down appropriately under double-waved yellow flags when Oliver Bearman's HOS came to a halt, triggering a virtual safety car. The consequences of that alleged infraction: a controversial pit stop that handed Russell the final podium position, snatching it away from the reigning world champion by a mere 2 seconds. First, Ain, who had been trailing Russell, immediately questioned the legality of the move over team radio, setting the stage for an official protest. It's the kind of drama Formula One fans live for. Championship contenders clashing off track in the stewards' room, reputations on the line, and a podium under threat. The protest referenced Article of Appendix in the International Sporting Code, which clearly states that drivers must reduce speed significantly when encountering double-wave yellows. Red Bull believed Russell had failed to meet that threshold, potentially breaching the rules and gaining an unfair advantage. But the FIA's decision rejection. Protest denied, case closed. Or is it? If you're someone who craves the intricate layers behind F1's most controversial moments, make sure to subscribe right now. This is the kind of story that reshapes narratives, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Let's unpack exactly what happened in Miami. To truly understand the depth of this controversy, we need to rewind the clock to the heart of the Miami Grand Prix, a race defined by blistering heat, high tyre degradation, and razor-thin margins. As the laps ticked by, George Russell found himself in a tight battle with Max Verstappen for the final spot on the podium. Up ahead, the two McLarens were out of reach. The fight for 3 Pacers, however, was anything but settled. Then came a twist. On lap 28, the race was neutralised when Oliver Bearman's H suffered a mechanical issue, grinding to a halt just off the racing line. A virtual safety car was deployed, one of 3 during the race, and that's where the critical moment unfolded. George Russell, just behind the incident zone, saw the yellow flags being waved and made a split-second decision. Dive into the pits for a set of medium tyres. Under VSC conditions, pit stops cost significantly less time, and Russell's call allowed him to rejoin the track ahead of Max Verstappen. That decision would ultimately earn him the final podium spot, but not without controversy. From the Red Bull pit wall and Verstappen's cockpit, alarm bells were ringing. Verstappen radioed his team immediately, questioning whether Russell had properly slowed under the yellow flags. It wasn't just a frustrated driver venting. It was a subtle yet pointed accusation, and it set the wheels in motion for what would become a formal protest to the FIA after the checkered flag. Let's now dig into the legal and technical layers that underpin this case. The ruling question is Appendix of the FIA's International Sporting Code. It states in no uncertain terms that under a double-waved yellow flag, a driver must reduce speed significantly and be prepared to change direction or stop. The key phrase here is reduce speed significantly. But what exactly does that mean? And more importantly, who gets to define significant? According to Red Bull, Russell's actions did not meet the threshold. While onboard footage and telemetry did show a throttle lift, Red Bull argued that this did not translate into a meaningful speed reduction. They asserted that Russell's absolute speed through the yellow flag sector was not slower than it had been prior to the yellow flag being displayed. In simpler terms, yes, Russell lifted his foot off the accelerator, but he didn't go any slower. Their argument was built on a comparison. Max Verstappen, who followed Russell through the same zone, did reduce his speed more noticeably. In Red Bull's view, Verstappen's behaviour was the benchmark for proper compliance, while Russell's looked like a tactical lift, just enough to check a regulatory box without compromising race time. Mercedes, of course, had a different interpretation. Their defence was grounded in both precedent and technical analysis. According to Mercedes, Russell lifted the throttle by approximately 25%, resulting in a 30% drop in engine torque that they said constituted a significant reduction as required by the regulations. They also cited telemetry comparisons with other drivers to show that Russell's response was consistent with what the FIA and other teams consider acceptable in a yellow flag zone. Furthermore, Mercedes argued that it is common practice, a critical term in F1 regulatory debates, for a driver to signal compliance by lifting the throttle rather than slowing to an arbitrarily low speed. They insisted that this protocol has long been understood between teams and the FIA. So, unless a driver blatantly ignores a flag and maintains full throttle, a measurable throttle lift should suffice. Here's where the FIA stepped in and made a decision that could ripple through future interpretations of the rulebook. The stewards evaluated all available evidence: onboard camera angles, sector times, throttle traces, torque outputs, and GPS data. They concluded that Russell had lifted sufficiently to demonstrate awareness and compliance with the yellow flag, even though his absolute speed through the zone had increased slightly. This last point is crucial. The FIA clarified that discernible reduced speed is not necessarily about going slower in raw numbers, but about reducing pace relative to racing speed in that specific zone. For example, in a braking zone, a driver may naturally slow down even under green flags, but that doesn't indicate they've responded to a yellow. So the stewards argued that relative speed reduction, not just absolute speed, is the correct benchmark. In their words, the speed of car 63 in the yellow flag zone was considerably slower than the regular racing speed, but the absolute speed while passing through the yellow flag zone increased slightly. The requirement can only relate to reduction relative to the regular racing speed. In essence, the FIA sided with contextual interpretation over strict numeric thresholds. It was a vote for nuance over rigidity. But does this decision raise more questions than it answers? For starters, Red Bull may have lost this protest, but they've successfully highlighted a grey area in the regulations. The phrase "reduce speed significantly" is still open to subjective interpretation, and while the FIAS ruling offers some clarity, it also relies heavily on precedent and implied understanding rather than hard-coded rules. This opens up a strategic window for teams in future races. If throttle lifts of around 25% are considered acceptable, even if the car speed doesn't drop dramatically, then drivers may feel emboldened to push the limits during yellow flag conditions. The risk of overlifting and losing track position is real, and teams are always seeking that razor-thin edge. Furthermore, what does this mean for Verstappen's own actions? By Red Bull's logic, he drove more cautiously, reducing speed to a greater extent than necessary, thus losing time. One could argue that Verstappen penalised himself by being too compliant while Russell optimised the grey zone. In that case, the real issue isn't Russell's behaviour, it's the rule's ambiguity. There's also a psychological component at play. By filing the protest, Red Bull applied pressure, not just on Mercedes, but on the FIA. It's a form of political signalling, a way of saying, we're watching, we're keeping receipts. Even if the protest didn't succeed, it may affect how similar incidents are judged in future, or how aggressively teams respond to yellow flag incidents.